Right now, tonight, you're going to do something so automatic you won't even remember doing it. Somewhere around 3 a.m., you're going to get cold in your sleep, and without ever fully waking up, you're going to reach over, grab the blanket, and drag it up to your chin. That tiny half conscious move isn't a modern habit. It's one of the oldest problems our species has ever had to solve. It's older than writing, older than farming, older even than fire, because for a huge stretch of our history, we didn't have fire to save us at night. So the question is, for hundreds of thousands of years, before blankets, before walls, before any of that, what did ancient humans actually do when it was just too cold to sleep? To answer that, we have to go back further than you'd think. Not to caves, not to campfires, to the trees. Our early ancestors, the ones before Homo even existed, slept up in branches, the same way chimps and gorillas still do. It wasn't really about temperature. It was about not getting eaten. But somewhere around 2 million years ago, early Homo species started doing something risky: sleeping on the ground. Researchers who study modern hunter-gatherer sleep, like anthropologist David Sampson, think this shift mattered enormously. Ground sleeping let bodies stretch out fully, which seems to have deepened REM sleep. But it came with a brutal trade-off. No canopy, no body heat trapped in leaves, just open air and the African night, which can drop shockingly cold once the sun goes down. Think about that. Our ancestors traded safety and warmth for better sleep quality and just had to eat the cold. For a long time, that's all they had. Huddle close, curl up small, pick a spot with a rock wall at your back to cut the wind. That was the whole strategy. Then, around 1 million years ago, something changed everything. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found burned bone fragments and ash deep inside the cave floor, dated to roughly 1 million years old. It's some of the earliest solid evidence we have of hominins controlling fire, not just using fire that happened to be nearby after a lightning strike, keeping it, feeding it, sitting near it. That's the moment cold nights stopped being a fight you could only lose. But controlling a spark once in a while isn't the same as having reliable heat every night. That took longer to lock in. At a site called Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, dated to around 780,000 years ago, researchers found repeated hearths in the same spots, layer after layer, along with stone tools scattered in a ring pattern around where the fire would have been. That ring pattern is the tell. It means people were consistently sitting, working, and almost certainly sleeping arranged around a central heat source. Fire wasn't a lucky event anymore, it was furniture. But here's the problem with fire: it only keeps you warm on one side. It burns through fuel. Someone has to wake up and feed it, over and over all night long. And it does nothing for the actual surface you're lying on, which, if you're sleeping on bare stone or packed dirt, is still pulling heat straight out of your body while the flames warm your face. Neanderthals ran into this exact issue tens of thousands of years later, and they came up with a strangely modern fix. At Abric Romaní, a rock shelter in Spain occupied on and off for over 60,000 years, archaeologists have found thick layers of ash spread out from the hearths across the living floor. For a while, that ash was just written off as leftover mess, but closer analysis suggests some of it was deliberately raked out and packed down into a layer beneath where people slept. Compacted ash is a surprisingly good insulator. It traps residual heat, blocks cold rising up from the rock below, and it's dry, which matters when you're trying to avoid sleeping on damp, freezing ground. Neanderthals, in other words, may have invented the underfloor heating pad, out of ash, from the fire they'd already burned. So around 77,000 years ago, at Sibudu Cave in South Africa, humans solved a completely different piece of the puzzle: the bed itself. Archaeologist Lynn Wadley and her team found layered bedding built from sedge and rush plants pressed flat into thick mats. That alone is impressive. But they also found something stranger mixed into the layers: leaves from a plant called Cryptocarya woodii, which happens to contain natural insect-repelling and larvicidal compounds. These early sleepers weren't just piling up grass. They were choosing the right plant, on purpose, to keep biting insects out of their bedding while they slept. Think about that. That's not survival on autopilot. That's planning. That's understanding your local plants well enough to engineer a better night's sleep, insulated from the cold ground below and defended from bugs above. This is the moment the story stops being, "How did humans not freeze?" and starts being, how did humans start optimizing comfort? That shift matters because it means sleep wasn't just something ancient humans endured, it was something they actively worked to improve. But grass beds and fire pits could only do so much once humans started pushing into seriously cold territory. And they did. Populations moved north into Siberia, into landscapes with winters that could kill an unprotected body in an hour. That required a completely different technology, clothing that actually fit. In Denisova Cave in Siberia, archaeologists uncovered a tiny bone needle, radiocarbon dated to roughly 50,000 years old, with an eye drilled through one end for thread. A needle like that isn't for wrapping a hide around your shoulders like a cape. It's for tailoring, for sewing seams, closing gaps, shaping fur into something that traps body heat instead of letting it pour out through every open edge. Somewhere in deep Ice Age Siberia, someone figured out that a fitted garment keeps you alive in a way a draped one never could. That idea reached its most extreme form at a site called Sungir in Russia, dated to around 34,000 years ago. Burials there preserved thousands of ivory beads, arranged in patterns archaeologists believe were sewn directly onto tailored clothing, tracing the outline of hoods, sleeves, and trousers. This was Ice Age Russia. Winters brutal enough that clothing wasn't a fashion choice, it was the difference between waking up and not waking up. And these people weren't just wearing fur, they were engineering full-body insulated suits, stitched to the shape of an actual human, 34,000 years before anyone invented a sleeping bag. Same idea, honestly. I'd still pick the sleeping bag. By around 15,000 years ago, humans took the final step. They stopped relying only on clothes and fire, and started building the shelter itself as insulation. At Mezhirich, in modern-day Ukraine, archaeologists found dwellings constructed almost entirely from mammoth bones. Jawbones stacked to form walls, tusks curved into doorframes, the whole structure likely covered in hides for a thick, wind-blocking skin. Inside, hearths. Multiple people, sleeping close together under one insulated roof in the middle of an Ice Age landscape that offered almost no natural shelter at all. That's the whole toolkit finally coming together in one place. Fire for direct heat, ash and bedding for insulation from the ground, tailored clothing for insulation on the body, group sleeping for shared warmth, and architecture built from whatever the land actually offered, even if that meant a house made out of dead mammoths, to block the wind entirely. And it worked. People raised children through Ice Age winters inside those bone houses. Entire generations grew up warm enough to sleep through nights that, without every single one of those inventions stacked on top of each other, would have killed them by morning. So here's the full picture. It starts with early humans on the open ground with nothing but each other and a rock at their backs. Then, fire, kept alive on purpose. Then hearths, arranged into daily life. Then ash beds, packed down for warmth under the bare rock of a cave floor. Then plant bedding, engineered with the right leaves to keep the bugs out. Then clothing, sewn to the shape of the body with a needle barely bigger than a splinter. Then full shelters stacked out of mammoth bone, built to survive winters that could kill in hours. And every single one of those breakthroughs exists, quietly, in your bedroom tonight. Your comforter is Sibudu Cave's insulated bedding. Your fitted sheets echo Sungir's tailored furs. Your walls and roof are Mezhirich's mammoth bone shelter, minus the mammoth. Even your thermostat is just fire, made invisible and automatic. So the next time you unconsciously grab the blanket and pull it up in the middle of the night, that's not a small thing. That's hundreds of thousands of years of trial, death, invention, and stubborn refusal to just accept the cold, compressed into one half-asleep, 2-second reflex. We didn't just survive the cold. We spent our entire history redesigning the night so it couldn't touch us, and honestly, that might be one of the most human things we've ever done.